1984. Not just a year for dystopian futures. Nope, it was a banner year for being a child and having amazing playthings. The 80s opened up a whole new world of play, and a lot of this was because of a court decision made in 1980 allowing toys to have half an hour long TV commercials disguised as cartoons. But that's a video for another time. Either way, whatever the reason, the early 1980s saw an onslaught of a huge number of new toys and IP that went on to become long-term evergreen toy lines that are really, honestly, still offered today and were all birthed from the beginning of this decade. And one of the kings of all of those toys was Masters of the Universe. See, yeah, what a shocker. I'm talking about Masters of the Universe on the Spectra Creative channel. I'm your host, Scott ToyGuru Neitlich. I was the brand manager for Masters of the Universe for about 10 years, and I'm also an adult collector and a parent. And that's given me a unique perspective. You see, in 1984, Masters of the Universe was doing so well that it actually outsold Barbie for Mattel. And this had the reaction of what from the Barbie group. Because Barbie was used to being Queen of the Aisle. King of the Aisle? Queen of the Aisle. And now the hearts and minds of children everywhere were being taken over by Masters of the Universe, and for the first time in decades, there was a new top dog at Mattel outselling the blonde bombshell doll. Masters of the Universe still continued to climb. It had things like mall shows, and it had things, well, plans for even bigger things like Thanksgiving Day parade floats, and it just kept growing and growing and growing and becoming more of a cultural phenomenon. Well, how is everyone going to react like this? Well, if you think that Barbie is the only toy that can give a poor self-image to children, you ain't seen He-Man, right? Come on, what child could possibly look like that? And in today's world where everyone feels boys and girls and everyone should play the same and be the same, very different in the 80s. In the 80s, Masters of the Universe was very much advertised to and targeted to boys 4 to 11. They were featured prominently in the commercials, and while some of the advertising did target mom and parents, they were all featuring mom, parents with a young boy who was discovering the world of Eternia through Masters of the Universe and fantasy play. But the interesting thing, there were a lot of great, well, 3 female figures in the original Masters of the Universe toy line, 2 early on and Sorceress added later. And when the marketing group did research to learn more about the demographics buying the Masters of the Universe toys, they found something surprising. 40% of the sales were to girls. This toy that was heavily marketed to boys was selling more or less just as well to young girls. Young girls of the 80s also fell in love with the Masters of the Universe toy line. The colorful characters, the awesome environments, the really cool action features. It was a groundbreaking line, and it's no surprise that both genders loved this toy line. And that gave the boys action figure group an idea. What if we created more female heroes that could blend in perfectly with the other action figures so we could continue to expand sales? One thing you should know about the way Mattel worked back in the 80s, and, well, a little bit now, today, is it's kind of divided up into fiefdoms. You have your girls group, your boys group, your wheels group, your games and puzzles group, and everyone kind of tends to build their own castle. Yes, we're all there to help the company do as well as it can and, raise the stock value, but everyone's a little protective of their own group. It was especially this way in the 80s. A little less so now. But yeah, I mean, even if you watch like the Toys That Made Us documentary on Netflix, you'll definitely get this impression if you watch the Barbie episode. And the idea that the boys group was going to create a female hero that was going to help Masters of the Universe sales expand even more, well, let's just say that's, while everyone's, supposed to be on the same team, The girls group, who was used to Barbie being the number one selling toy at the company and being known as, the major breadwinners, looking at what the boys group were doing, were thinking, I don't know if we want the boys group designing girl toys. And while everyone's supposed to play well together, and again, we're all on the same team, right? Trying to sell toys, make the company money overall, there was definitely, shall we say, interdepartmental jealousies. Would that be a good way of putting it? So the head of the girls group, and no, this obviously isn't the head of the girls group. I'm just looking for an image of a powerful '80s female, with the shoulder pads and the suit and all that to use. Well, they decided we're going to take charge of this project. If you want to create a girl figure, it should be in the girls group, not with the boys group. So while the concept for She-Ra started off in the male action group with the He-Man team, it was more or less absconded by the girls group, who took it over and decided to turn it into a girls line because, well, this way the revenue would go against the girls brands, not the boys brands. And everyone was kind of trying to have the most revenue. And this meant that She-Ra was, what became She-Ra, was going to have, long flowing hair that girls could comb because hair play is a huge part of the way girls play, and was going to have a pretty outfit made of soft goods, not just plastic like an action figure. And it wasn't just the concept of She-Ra the girls group grabbed onto. They needed villains for She-Ra to fight because she was going to be an action star of the girls group. The boys group had recently created a new group of bad guys for Masters of the Universe for He-Man, led by Hordak. He was inspired by a tiki mask that was hanging on the wall in the boys' design area. Originally, the Horde appeared in a mini book that introduced them as villains for He-Man, a new group of villains for 1985. This book, illustrated by Bruce Timm, yes, that Bruce Timm, and written by Tim Kilpin, yes, that Tim Kilpin, was originally released with the Hordak and Grizzlord 2-pack was the way you could actually get it, but it was written very early on. Tim was responsible for writing quite a few of the mini-comics. Well, actually, Bruce Timm was responsible for drawing a few of the mini-comics. So here they were teamed up to write a brand new story, and in this story, the Horde were specifically introduced as a double threat. They were going to be a new threat to both Skeletor and to He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. This way, it became sort of a three-way battle where all three factions could fight each other, and it gave more play for kids playing it out because they could now choose not just two factions, Skeletor versus He-Man, but you now had Hordak, who is an enemy of both of them. Honestly, really great idea. And again, the girls group looked at this and said, "Oh, you're developing a new bad guy? Well, we'll just take some of that." So She-Ra was on her way to development. She now had bad guys borrowed from the boys group and a design that the girls group could control. If you look at some of the early art for Masters of the Universe and how the designs are just a little bit different from how the toys came out, you can see this in She-Ra as well, specifically the way her mask was done. In the very first mini-comic and in the early cross-cell art, her mask is always over her face, hiding her secret identity. This was because she was designed to be a superhero, and the idea that she had to protect her identity as Adora, and the girls group felt that girls would like putting a mask over her. Well, it turned out in testing they did not, and every single one of the girls in the testing group flipped the mask upside down. And that is why the mask has those two odd holes right over her head. It's simply the mask flipped upside down to work more as a crown and less as a mask, because girls didn't like covering up her pretty eyes, which makes sense because she does have pretty eyes. In the Classics line, which is the one I worked on, we actually tried to pay homage to this by having the mask so it could attach in both ways. We did this through a hole in her forehead, which a lot of people for some reason interpreted as being anti-feminist, but it was just there so you could flip the mask upside down. Later art and later mini-comics quickly flipped the mask and made it more of the crown with the wings on either side of her head, as the girls showed when they played with it. The girls group also put out a huge guide on how She-Ra was to be handled. It was much, much more restrictive than even all of the He-Man brands. Everything from what the stories could be about, to how much violence could be in there, to how her powers work, were all spelled out. In particular, I like the point that any scripts that have Adora using powers that are exclusively to She-Ra will be fed to the Baboons, because apparently the girls group kept a harem of baboons around to feed scripts to. I was not aware of this, but hey, it's right there in black and white. Baboons. So, She-Ra became a doll line. She started off as an action figure line, but the desire to have the revenue and success and the acclaim that the boys group wanted by growing He-Man into a girls line too was something the girls group wanted under their belt. And you have to wonder, what if it hadn't transferred to the girls group? What if the boys group had been able to create She-Ra and she was an action figure, not a doll? Well, you can kind of see this in classics because we did this deliberately. We made She-Ra an action figure designed by the boys group. I was in the boys group, and all of her cast members as well. All of the fellow members of her team and her bad guys also as action figures. And maybe this is what they would have looked like in the 80s had the boys group continued development of the line instead of the girls group turning it into a doll line. And, not that that was bad. Super 7 also did a action figure line showing what maybe they would have looked like had they followed the Star Wars template of 3 3/4 figures with 4 points of articulation. Also a really cool interpretation of the brand, and I definitely love what Super 7 had to do. In the end, Princess of Power was a girls line, developed by the girls team, put out by the girls team. And it was a really cool line. It was fantastic. I'm not at all downplaying how great the line was. It just kind of leaves the what if it had remained with the boys group that had initiated the idea and not turned it into a fashion doll with different outfits and long hair. And that also doesn't mean boys didn't play with She-Ra too. In fact, when my sister got 2 She-Ras for her birthday one year, I kind of snuck in and took one of them and put it with my He-Man toys. Please don't tell my sister I stole her She-Ra. Thank you. She's mad at me enough already. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, please do subscribe and give it a thumbs up. It tells YouTube to share it with other people. And I answer all the comments below, so let me know your thoughts and I'll give you some answers. Thanks for watching.